The ballroom glittered with golden lights, chandeliers hanging like frozen waterfalls from the high ceiling. It was the kind of evening where everything seemed designed to impress, gristle glasses catching the light, waiters gliding quietly, with silver trays, and a string quartet filling the air with gentle music. Guests in expensive gowns and tailored suits moved from table to table, greeting old friends and meeting new faces. For the elite of New York City, this charity gala was one of the most important events of the year. A place where influence, power, and money often changed hands behind polite smiles. Maya Richardson arrived with her usual calm confidence. Her long, deep emerald dress was elegant but not flashy, her hair styled simply, and her smile warm. She had built her reputation over years of hard work, starting from a modest neighborhood and rising to become the CEO of one of the most respected business consulting firms in the country. Tonight was supposed to be more than just a social occasion. It was the final step for sealing a $5 billion partnership with the Harrington family, one of the wealthiest and most powerful business dynasties in the United States. As she entered the room, a few heads turned, some recognizing her from business magazines and interviews. She nodded politely to people she knew, exchanging greetings with other CEOs, philanthropists, and public figures. Somewhere in the crowd, she spotted Richard Harrington, the silver-haired patriarch of the family, speaking to a group of influential investors. His wife, Eleanor, stood nearby in a sparkling silver gown, laughing with an old senator. The Harringtons were the kind of family who had been rich for generations. Their name attached to luxury hotels, global shipping companies, and massive real estate projects. Maya had spent months negotiating with them, working through contracts, legal details, and strategic plans. Tonight they were supposed to share a toast, celebrate their agreement, and prepare for the official signing in. The coming weeks, she approached them with a friendly expression, expecting warmth after so much collaboration. But as she neared, she caught a brief exchange between Eleanor and another woman. They glanced at her, whispered something, and smiled in a way that wasn't entirely kind. She ignored it at first. In rooms like this, people often made quick judgments about clothes, accents, or even posture. Maya was used to it, and most of the time, she let it slide. She focused instead on joining a conversation with one of the Harrington sons, Andrew, who was discussing the company's international expansion. His handshake was firm, his words polite, but his eyes seemed to hold a distant amusement, as though he knew something she didn't. The evening moved forward with speeches and auctions. Guests bid on rare paintings, luxury trips, and even private dinners with celebrities, all to raise money for charity. Maya participated, placing a generous bid on a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. When she won, the announcer publicly thanked her, and the room gave polite applause. But from across the table, she caught Richard Harrington's smirk, followed by a comment to his eldest son. She didn't hear the words, but she saw the son's amused reaction. As more champagne flowed and conversations loosened, she started noticing patterns. Whenever she spoke, a couple of the Harringtons would exchange glances. Once, when she mentioned her company's growth in Africa and Asia, she caught Eleanor muttering something to her friend, followed by quiet laughter. It was the kind of laughter that didn't belong in a discussion about success. It felt dismissive, like they were reducing her story to something small. Maya's experience had taught her to keep her composure in such moments. She smiled, continued her conversations, and never let a hint of discomfort show. But inside, she felt a familiar heaviness. She had worked for decades to be seen for her abilities, not for anyone's stereotypes or assumptions. She had walked into this ballroom proud of what she had accomplished, believing this deal was built on mutual respect. Now, she was starting to wonder. The highlight of the evening was the dinner. When all guests took their seats at long, beautifully decorated tables, crystal glasses sparkled under the soft lighting, and plates of perfectly arranged appetizers appeared before them. Maya was seated directly across from Andrew Harrington, with Richard to her right and Eleanor at the far end. At first, the talk was polite about the wine, the charity, and the weather. But slowly, the tone shifted. Andrew leaned forward and, in a casual voice, asked Maya if she often attended events like this. She replied that she had been too many, both in the US and abroad, through her work and philanthropic efforts. He nodded, then added with a faint grin, "It must feel different from where you started, right?" The comment was vague enough to be passed off as harmless, but his tone made it clear it was more than small talk. Richard chuckled softly, and Eleanor sipped her wine without looking at Maya. In that moment, she felt the weight of every barrier she had overcome pressing against her. She remembered nights working late, while others doubted her, mornings facing rejection before finally earning her seat at the table. And here she was, at a table she had earned, being treated like a curiosity instead of an equal. Still, she didn't respond sharply. Instead, she gave a measured smile and said, "Every step in life feels different from where you started. That's how you know you're moving forward." The conversation moved on, but the energy at the table had shifted for her. She was no longer just watching for signs of subtle disrespect, she was expecting them. Each laugh that came too quickly, each glance exchanged between family members, felt like another small cut. Yet she stayed calm, determined not to let them see that their behavior had touched her. Around the room, other guests continued their joyful chatter, unaware of the quiet undercurrents at her table. Maya kept her attention on the charity, the cause, and the positive connections she could make with others. But in the back of her mind, a quiet voice was already asking a dangerous question. If this is how they treat me tonight, in public, surrounded by cameras and witnesses, how will they treat me once the deal is signed, behind closed doors? That thought stayed with her for the rest of the evening. Even as the desserts were served and the final auction items were announced, Maya was no longer thinking about celebrating the partnership. She was thinking about something much bigger, her values, her dignity, whether this was truly the kind of alliance she wanted for herself and for the company she had built from the ground up. By the time the gala drew to a close, the guests began gathering their coats and saying goodbyes. Maya had already decided that something had changed. She didn't yet know exactly what she would do. But one thing was certain, this night would not be forgotten, and neither would the way she had been made to feel. The next morning, the bright sunlight poured through the tall windows of Maya's hotel suite, but she barely noticed it. Her mind kept replaying moments from the gala, the sideways glances, the whispered comments, and that thin smile on Richard Harrington's face as though he knew exactly what he was doing. She had been in enough boardrooms to recognize when someone was silently measuring her worth against their own assumptions. And last night, it had been happening in plain sight. Still, she told herself not to jump to conclusions. Business was full of egos and misunderstandings, and perhaps she had been too sensitive to the tone of the evening. She dressed for the day in a crisp navy suit, ready for a series of follow-up meetings that had been scheduled to finalize the details of the Billionaire partnership. Her assistant Claire met her in the hotel lobby with a warm smile and a folder of documents. "Big day," Claire said cheerfully. "We're close to wrapping this up." Maya nodded, returning the smile, though inside she felt an unusual hesitation. They arrived at the Harrington Group headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that stood like a monument to wealth. In the main conference room, the Harringtons were already gathered, along with several board members and advisors. The table was set with coffee, fresh pastries, and folders for everyone. On the surface, it looked like a routine high-level business meeting, but as the conversation began, that same undercurrent from the gala seemed to follow. When Maya presented her ideas for joint projects in international markets, one of the board members, a cousin of the family, leaned back and said, "Interesting, it's ambitious." The pause before the word ambitious was just long, enough to sound doubtful. Another chimed in about how different her approach was from what they were used to. His smile tight and polite. Maya kept her responses professional, addressing each concern with facts, figures, and clear reasoning. But she noticed something. When male executives at the table spoke, their ideas were met with nods and immediate follow-up questions. When she spoke, there was often a moment of silence, as if her words needed to be weighed before anyone reacted. The meeting stretched on for over 2 hours. Every time she thought they had reached an agreement on a detail, someone would raise a small objection, forcing her to explain herself again. It was subtle, but the pattern was clear. They were making her work harder for approval than they would have demanded from someone they considered one of their own. After the meeting ended, the Harringtons invited her to join them for a private luncheon at an exclusive restaurant nearby. She accepted, telling herself it might be an opportunity to strengthen the relationship. The restaurant was quiet and refined, the kind of place where the walls seemed to absorb sound, creating a hush around each table. At first, the conversation was about safe topics, the charity's success, the city's upcoming cultural events, and travel plans. But then, almost casually, one of the Harrington daughters asked Maya if she had ever been to a gala like last night before joining their circle. The question was framed as curiosity, but the tone felt more like testing. Maya smiled politely. I've attended many events for both business and philanthropy over the years. Each one is unique, of course. The daughter tilted her head slightly. Oh, of course. I suppose it must be exciting for you. That small sentence was enough to confirm what Maya had been sensing. There was a barrier here, invisible but very real. They didn't see her as an equal partner. They saw her as an outsider, who should be grateful to be invited into their world. As the meal continued, conversation turned to global markets. And Andrew Harrington made a comment about how certain regions aren't ready for sophisticated investment models. Maya recognized the veiled dismissal. Those were the same regions where her company had achieved some of its greatest successes. She responded with a calm explanation of how local partnerships had created sustainable growth. But she could feel his disinterest. He wasn't looking for insight. He was reinforcing a view of the world where his family's way was the only way. By the time dessert arrived, Maya had made a decision. She would not let them see any sign of offense or frustration. In her world, composure was power, and she had no intention of giving them the satisfaction of knowing their behavior had touched her. She thanked them for the lunch, shook hands with each person, and left with her assistant. Back at the hotel, Claire noticed Maya's thoughtful silence. Are you okay? She asked gently. Maya took a deep breath. I'm fine, but I'm starting to think this deal might not be what it should be. Claire looked surprised. You've worked on it for months. What's making you doubt it? Not just the numbers or the business plan, Maya said. It's the people. If we can't respect each other now before we've even signed the papers, how will it be once we're locked into years of collaboration? Claire didn't argue. She had been in enough meetings to see the subtle signs too. The challenge wasn't just closing the deal, it was deciding whether the deal was worth closing at all. That evening, Maya attended a smaller networking reception for other executives in town for the Gala week. There she spoke with leaders from different industries, people who listened when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and treated her as a peer. The contrast was striking. With them, she felt her usual spark, the energy that came from genuine exchange and shared ambition. It made her realize something important. She didn't need the Harrington deal to keep building her company's success. Yes, $5 billion was a staggering sum, and the prestige of partnering with such a famous family could open certain doors. But the cost working with people who looked down on her was too high. By the time she returned to her suite, she had clarity. She wasn't going to rush into a final decision, but she would not ignore what she had experienced. Respect was non-negotiable. The night before, she had walked into the gala ready to toast a new chapter. Now, she was thinking about a very different kind of ending, one where she chose herself, her principles, and her dignity over the approval of those who had shown they did not truly value her. And deep down, she knew, if the Harringtons thought they were the only ones who could offer her an opportunity of this scale, they were in for a surprise. The third evening of her stay in New York brought another formal event, this time a more intimate dinner hosted by one of the Harrington family's close associates. It was meant to be a celebration of the upcoming partnership, though no final documents had been signed yet. Maya arrived with her assistant, Claire, ready to keep the evening light and professional. She had decided that until she made her final choice about the deal, she would stay calm and give the Harringtons no reason to suspect her growing doubts. The restaurant chosen for the dinner was one of the city's oldest and most exclusive, with walls lined in dark mahogany and shelves filled with vintage wines. A long table had been set for 12 guests, each place marked with elegant calligraphy name cards. Maya was seated between Andrew Harrington and a well-known venture capitalist. With Richard Harrington directly across from her, the evening began. Pleasantly enough, conversation flowed about art, travel, and the city's history. Maya shared a story about a recent project her company had completed in South America, explaining how local communities were empowered through business training and investment. The venture capitalist beside her listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions. But halfway through her story, Andrew interrupted with a small laugh. "That's quite the success," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You must have been lucky to find the right people to trust in places like that. It's not always safe, you know." His tone was light, as if he were offering friendly advice, but Maya caught the implication. He was suggesting that her achievements were the result of chance, not strategy or skill. She smiled politely. "Luck plays a part in everything, Andrew, but preparation and respect for the people you work with go a lot further." Richard chuckled softly and shook his head as though he found her response charming but slightly naive. It was a familiar gesture by now, one that told her they were not truly listening to the value in her words. As the meal went on, the atmosphere at her end of the table began to shift. Eleanor Harrington, who had been speaking with another guest, turned her attention toward Maya. With a gentle smile, she asked, "Do you ever feel out of place at these kinds of gatherings? I imagine it must be different from your usual environment." For a moment, Maya considered her answer carefully. She could have taken offense, but she chose her words with calm precision. "I've learned that any room you walk into becomes your environment when you bring your work, your values, and your experience with you." A few guests at the table nodded subtly, impressed with her composure. But the Harringtons exchanged glances again, silent communication that seemed to say they were amused more than convinced. The rest of the evening followed the same pattern. Maya would contribute to the discussion with examples from her career, and one or more members of the Harrington family would add a remark that, while not openly unkind, carried a quiet undertone of dismissal. It was almost like a game to them, seeing how far they could go without crossing the line into outright rudeness. After dessert, the group moved to a lounge area for after-dinner drinks. A grand piano stood in one corner, and a musician played soft, timeless tunes. It was here, away from the main dining table, that the remark that would seal Maya's decision was made. Andrew, standing beside her as they waited for coffee to be served, lowered his voice slightly and said, "You know, you've done very well for yourself, considering where you started." It was the kind of sentence that could be brushed off if someone wanted to avoid confrontation. But Maya knew its weight. He wasn't just referring to her career beginnings. He was implying that her background was something unusual in their world, something that made her success surprising. For a split second, Maya felt her breath catch. She looked directly at him, her expression steady. "Where we start is just the first chapter," she said quietly. "It doesn't define the ending." He smiled faintly, as if amused by her response, and turned away to speak to someone else. Maya remained where she was, her mind now completely clear. This was no longer about misunderstandings or differences in style. This was about values. The fact that theirs did not align with hers. She realized that moving forward with the deal would mean aligning herself with people who saw her not as a partner, but as a curiosity. Perhaps even as someone who had something to prove to them. That was not the foundation for a healthy or respectful business relationship. By the time she returned to her hotel that night, the decision was no longer in question. She would not move forward with the Harrington deal. The question now was not if she would walk away, but how she would do it. She wanted to make her exit in a way that was professional, controlled, and unmistakably clear in its reasoning without giving them any room to twist her actions into something else. She sat in the quiet of her suite, looking out at the city lights. The skyline shimmered against the dark night, full of stories of ambition and triumph. She thought about the path she had taken to get here, the challenges she had faced, the countless times she had chosen the harder road because it was the right one. The $5 billion. deal had seemed like the perfect next step for her company, but she knew now that no amount of money could justify compromising her principles. The Harringtons might have influence, but she had something even more valuable: her integrity. She would not trade that for anything. The next morning, she would begin putting her plan into action. But tonight, she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. Walking away from this deal would not be a loss. It would be a statement. The morning after the dinner, Maya woke up earlier than usual. The decision she had made the night before had settled in her mind like a calm certainty. There was no doubt, no second-guessing, no temptation to change course. She knew what she had to do, and she knew she would have to do it in a way that left no room for confusion. The city outside was waking up slowly. With the sound of early traffic drifting up to her hotel suite, she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the skyline. This was not the first time in her career that she had walked away from a major opportunity. But it was the first time the stakes were this high: $5 billion. Months of preparation and a partnership that would have been a headline-making deal. Yet the more she thought about it, the more she realized it was not worth the cost. Claire arrived at the suite around 8, her expression curious but supportive. "So," she asked gently, "have you made your choice?" Maya nodded. "We're going to withdraw." Claire hesitated for a moment, then gave a small smile. "I thought that's what you'd say. Do you want me to set up the meeting?" as Maya said. "Reach out to their board representatives. Tell them I want an urgent meeting this morning." By 9 o'clock, the meeting was confirmed. Maya, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit with a white blouse, sharp, professional, and understated. She wanted her appearance to reflect her message, firm, clear, and without unnecessary emotion. On the drive to the Harrington Group headquarters, she went over in her mind exactly how she would phrase her words. She would not make this personal. Even though the reason behind it was deeply personal, she would frame it in terms of business principles, knowing that in their world, it would carry weight. The conference room was exactly as it had been before long. Glass table, backed chairs, the city skyline visible through floor to ceiling. Windows. This time, however, the energy was different. The Harrington representatives seemed relaxed, expecting another step forward in the deal. Richard Harrington himself was not present, but 2 of his sons were, along with the family's chief financial officer and legal counsel. "Good morning, Maya," the CFO greeted warmly. "We're ready to finalize the next steps. We just need your confirmation on a few clauses, and then we can move toward signing." Maya placed her folder on the table, folded her hands, and met each person's eyes. "I appreciate the time and effort that has gone into these discussions. However, I have decided not to move forward with the partnership." The room went still. One of the Harrington sons frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" Maya said clearly that after careful consideration, "I believe there are irreconcilable differences in our business values and vision. For that reason, my company will be withdrawing from the agreement." The CFO blinked, clearly taken aback. "But we've already invested months into this process. If there's a specific issue with the terms, we can work through it." "This is not about the terms," Maya replied. Her voice was steady, calm, and precise. "It's about alignment. A partnership of this scale requires not just financial agreement, but mutual respect, trust, and shared values. Without those, the numbers don't matter. I cannot, in good conscience, commit to a long-term relationship that I believe would not be healthy for either side." One of the sons leaned forward, his tone sharp but controlled. "If this is about something someone said or did, I'm sure we can clear it up. You know how social events can be, people talk casually. Sometimes things come out wrong. There's no need to let that affect the deal." Maya gave a polite smile, but there was firmness in her eyes. Words matter, actions matter, and the way people conduct themselves, especially in public, reflects the culture they bring into every partnership. I value my company's culture too much to risk damaging it." There was a moment of silence. The Harrington representatives looked at each other, perhaps realizing that her decision was final. Finally, the CFO gave a small nod, as though accepting what he could not change. "We're sorry to hear that." but we respect your choice." "Thank you," Maya said simply. She gathered her folder, stood, and extended her hand to each person. At the table, "I wish you all the best in your future endeavors." As she left the building, she felt no regret, only relief. The air outside felt fresher, the noise of the city somehow more alive. She knew there would be people in the business world who would question her decision, who would wonder why she had walked away from such a massive opportunity. But she also knew that those who understood her reasoning would respect her even more. For by midday, word of the canceled deal had begun to circulate in certain business circles. At first, the news was vague, just that the negotiations had ended unexpectedly. But whispers soon followed, with people asking what had really happened. Maya, however, stayed silent. She issued only a short, professional statement. After careful review, both parties have agreed not to proceed with the partnership due to differences in vision and values. Privately, a few executives who had been at the gala reached out to her. They didn't ask for details they already knew. One even said, "You did the right thing. Not every deal is worth taking, no matter how big the number." That afternoon, as she sat in her office reviewing new proposals from other potential partners, Maya realized something powerful. Walking away had opened a new kind of door. She no longer felt bound to the weight of the Harrington name or the influence they carried, as she was free to build something with people who truly respected her, who saw her as an equal, and who valued the principles her company stood for. The Harringtons might never understand the real reason she had left. Or perhaps they would and simply choose to ignore it. But it didn't matter. In her world, integrity was a currency far more valuable than money, and she had just made one of the most valuable investments of her life. In the days following Maya's decision, the business world buzzed with curiosity. A $5 billion deal did not simply vanish without people asking questions. News outlets reported the end of the negotiations with headlines like "Surprise Collapse of Mega Deal between Richardson, Global, and Harrington Group, and $5 billion. Partnership called off. Reasons remain unclear." Publicly, Maya's statement remained the same. The partnership had ended due to differences in vision and values. She did not give interviews, did not make any personal remarks, and did not hint at the private reasons behind her choice. That calm professionalism only deepened the intrigue. People speculated, but without her confirming anything. All they had were pieces of the puzzle. Inside the Harrington Group, however, the story was different. Several individuals who had attended the gala or the private dinners knew exactly what had happened. They'd heard the subtle remarks, seen the dismissive glances, and watched Maya's quiet but firm responses. Some of these witnesses spoke in private to colleagues and friends. And soon the whispers began to reach the ears of journalists. An article appeared in a well-respected financial magazine. It's written by a reporter known for carefully sourced stories. It did not accuse anyone directly, but it described the atmosphere at the gala in detail: the glances, the tone of certain comments, and the way Maya had been treated as if she were an outsider. The article praised her for having the strength to walk away from such a lucrative deal, rather than align herself with partners who did not respect her. Public reaction was swift. Many readers admired her decision, calling it a rare example of integrity in the high-stakes world of corporate partnerships. Social media filled with messages from young professionals who saw her as an inspiration. "She proved that dignity is worth more than billions," one post read. Another said, "Maya Richardson just reminded us all that we don't have to stay where we're not respected." Meanwhile, the Harrington family faced an uncomfortable shift in their public image. For decades, they had been admired as shrewd and successful, but now there was a shadow over their name. Investors began to question whether their old-world attitudes were hurting their business in a modern, diverse marketplace. A few quietly distanced themselves from the family's ventures, not wanting to be associated with the negative press. Maya, however, stayed focused on her own path. She redirected her attention to a different partnership opportunity that had been on hold while the Harrington deal was in negotiation. This new group, a consortium of international investors, had a reputation for valuing diversity and ethical business practices. Their vision aligned perfectly with hers, and their respect for her leadership was genuine. Within weeks, Richardson Global signed a new agreement with the consortium. Though the financial scale was slightly smaller, $3.8 billion instead of $5 billion, the growth potential and the cultural fit were far greater. The announcement was met with excitement, and many business analysts noted that Maya's new partners seemed to share her long-term strategy in a way the Harringtons never had. At the press conference announcing the new deal, a journalist asked her indirectly about the decision to leave the Harrington negotiations. She smiled, her tone calm but deliberate. Every partnership, especially one of significant scale, must be built on more than numbers. It must be built on trust, shared vision, and mutual respect. Without those things, the deal is not truly a win for either side. I believe in choosing my partners as carefully as I choose my projects. That's all I will say on the matter. The room erupted in applause. Her words were clear enough for those who understood, yet diplomatic enough to leave no opening for argument. In the months that followed, Richardson Global flourished under the new partnership. Their joint projects launched in multiple countries, creating jobs and opportunities in underserved areas. Maya's leadership was praised not just for its business success, but for the example it set. She was invited to speak at international conferences, where she often told young entrepreneurs, "Know your worth and never compromise it for approval. The right people will see it and value it." As for the Harringtons, they eventually moved on 2 other ventures, but the memory of the deal they lost Dan Weilingerd in the business community. Some insiders claimed it had been a wake-up call for them, a lesson that the world had changed and that outdated attitudes could carry a heavy price. One evening, almost a year later, Maya attended another charity gala. The ballroom was different, the faces around her more diverse and welcoming. As she mingled with guests, she noticed how naturally conversations flowed, without hidden judgments or subtle barriers. People spoke to her as an equal, listened to her ideas and shared their own. Standing near the edge of the room, looking out over the crowd, Maya felt a quiet satisfaction. Walking away from the Harrington deal had not been easy, but it had been the right choice. She had protected her dignity, upheld her values, and proven that success did not require accepting less respect than you deserved. In the end, the $5 billion she had turned down was nothing compared to what she had gained: a reputation for integrity, partnerships built on trust, and the unshakable knowledge that she had stayed true to herself. She raised her glass in a silent toast to that truth, then turned back into the room, ready for whatever came next.